The golden halls of Lanedell should have been impregnable that night. Beneath, starlight filtered through ancient stone, past guardians sworn to eternal vigilance, through corridors that had never known the touch of shadow. Death came for the first time to claim a child of the Eternal Queen. Not with the thunderous clash of armies or the righteous fury of rebellion, but with whispers of black flame and blades that carved reality itself. When dawn broke over the capital, Godwyn the Golden, firstborn son of Queen Marika and mightiest of the demigods, lay dead. Yet in the lands between, where the Erdtree's light denies true death to all, even this murder would birth something far more terrible than any conspirator could have imagined. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where we unravel the dark mysteries woven into the foundations of gaming's most intricate worlds. Today we descend into one of Elden Ring's most haunting transformations, the metamorphosis of Godwyn, the Golden, into the Prince of Death, a tale that begins with divine conspiracy and ends with a corruption so profound it threatens the very roots of the world tree itself. The tragedy of Godwyn speaks to something primal in our understanding of death and divinity. Here was a being who embodied everything the Golden Order stood for: strength, nobility, the promise of eternal glory beneath the Erdtree's branches. His murder didn't just kill a demigod. It shattered the illusion of immortal perfection that Queen Marika had spent ages cultivating. But what makes Godwyn's fate truly horrifying isn't that he died. In the lands between, death had already been conquered, sealed away by Marika's design. No, what makes his story resonate through every shadowed catacomb and corrupted root is that he died wrong. His soul was severed while his body lived on, transforming into something that defied every natural law the Golden Order had established. To understand the abomination that Godwyn became, we must first understand the Golden Prince he was. Born as the firstborn son of Queen Marika the Eternal, and Godfrey, first Elden Lord, Godwyn represented the perfect fusion of divine authority and mortal strength. While his siblings would each embody different aspects of their parents' natures, Morgott and Mohg bearing the curse of the Crucible, later children manifesting various powers and afflictions, Godwyn seemed to capture only their greatest qualities. He grew tall and strong, with flowing golden hair that caught light like spun metal, features noble enough to inspire loyalty in friend and respect in foe alike. The Golden Order found in Godwyn its perfect champion. Where Marika ruled with divine authority and Godfrey conquered through might, Godwyn led through a combination of martial prowess and genuine nobility that made him beloved throughout the realm. Veterans of the ancient wars speak of him in reverent whispers, describing a warrior who could match his father's strength while possessing a strategic mind that saw beyond mere victory to lasting peace. His weapon of choice, a golden lightning-infused spear, became legendary in its own right, capable of calling down the very fury of the heavens upon his enemies. But perhaps the most defining moment of Godwyn's life came during the War of the Ancient Dragons. When the mighty dragon Grandsax attacked Lanedell, an assault so devastating that the creature's corpse still pierces the capital's walls to this day, it was Godwyn who led the counteroffensive. The dragons, beings of stone scale and crimson lightning, had seemed unstoppable. Their breath could reduce armies to ash, their scales turned aside the finest steel, and their mastery of ancient incantations predated even the Erdtree itself. Yet Godwyn met them not just with force, but with something unexpected: respect. The climactic battle between Godwyn and Fortissax, sister to the Dragon Lord himself, should have ended in one of their deaths. Witnesses describe a duel that lasted from dawn to dusk, golden lightning clashing against crimson, spear against claw, with such fury that the very stones of the battlefield were turned to glass. But when the dust settled, something unprecedented had occurred. Rather than striking the killing blow, Godwyn extended his hand in friendship. Fortissax, moved by this gesture from one who had proven himself her equal, accepted. This moment birthed the dragon cult of the capital, where ancient dragon incantations were taught alongside the fundamentalist principles of the Golden Order. The friendship between Godwin and Fortissax ran deeper than political convenience. The dragon, beings typically solitary and proud beyond mortal understanding, would visit the Golden Prince regularly. They shared knowledge, philosophy, and what witnesses describe as genuine companionship. Fortissax taught Godwin the ancient art of dragon communion, while he showed her the beauty in the Golden Order's vision of a world united beneath the Erd Tree. Some scholars suggest this friendship represented the Golden Order's greatest triumph, the peaceful integration of an ancient power that predated Marika's rule. Others see it as the first crack in the foundation, an acknowledgement that the Erd Tree's light alone wasn't sufficient to bring true unity. Godwin's influence extended far beyond military victories. As the eldest of Marika's children with Godfrey, he stood as unofficial heir to a throne that supposedly needed no heir. The Golden Order promised eternity after all, yet Godwin conducted himself as if preparing for a responsibility that should never come, studying statecraft, theology, and the delicate balance of power that kept the various factions of the lands between from each other's throats. His siblings looked to him for guidance. Even the proud Radahn and the brilliant Ranni engaged with him as equals rather than rivals. The golden age that Godwin represented couldn't last. Perhaps it was never meant to. The very perfection he embodied made him a target for those who saw the Golden Order not as salvation, but as a beautiful cage. And so we come to the Night of Black Knives, an event that would shatter the lands between more thoroughly than any war or conquest ever could. If you're finding value in this exploration of one of Elden Ring's darkest mysteries so far, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible, allowing us to uncover the hidden truths buried within gaming's most complex narratives. Now, let us descend into the conspiracy that would transform a Golden Prince into something far more terrible. The theft of destined death began not with violence, but with patient planning. Lunar Princess Ranni, daughter of Radagon and Rennala, had long chafed against the destiny her two fingers had ordained for her. As an Empyrean, she was chosen to potentially succeed Marika, to become a god wedded to the Golden Order's vision of eternity. But Ranni saw this not as honor, but as enslavement, her very being bound to serve as a vessel for the greater will's influence. Her solution required something thought impossible. She needed to kill her own body while preserving her soul, severing herself from the destiny written in her flesh. The Rune of Death, removed from the Elden Ring and bound to Maliketh's black blade, represented the only force capable of truly killing a demigod. Marika's shadow, the black beast of Farum Azula, guarded this power with devotion absolute. Yet somehow, Ranni managed what armies couldn't. The exact method remains debated. Some claim she exploited Maliketh's trust as family. Others suggest she discovered ancient knowledge that allowed her to steal just a fragment while he slept. What's confirmed is that she obtained enough of the Rune of Death to forge weapons capable of slaying the immortal. The Black Knife assassins she chose for this task weren't random mercenaries, but beings with their own mysterious connections to Marika herself. All women, all possessing movements described as being like flowing water. They wore armor that turned them nearly invisible, crafted from materials that seemed to exist partially outside reality itself. Ranni imbued their knives with the stolen power of destined death, creating weapons that could carve both flesh and spirit. These weren't mere blades, but instruments of metaphysical severance, capable of inflicting the true death that the Golden Order had banished. The night they struck, multiple assassination attempts occurred simultaneously across the lands between. This wasn't singular murder, but coordinated slaughter, designed to obscure the true target and intent. Lesser demigods and their entourages fell to black knives, their deaths serving as both distraction and message. The age of immortal divinity had ended. But the primary target, the one whose death would resonate through the very roots of reality, was Godwyn the Golden. The assassins who came for Godwin moved through Lando's defenses like smoke through light. Guards found themselves staring at empty air while death walked past them. Protective wards meant to detect hostile intent remained silent. The black knives bore no malice, only purpose. They found Godwin in his chambers, and here the historical record becomes frustratingly vague. Some accounts describe a brief struggle, others claim he never woke. What's certain is that the assassins succeeded in carving the half-wheel of the Cursemark of death into his flesh. At the exact moment Godwin's flesh was marked, hundreds of miles away in the divine tower of Liurnia, Ranni's body received the other half of the Cursemark. The rune of death, split between them, created an impossible paradox. Ranni's flesh died while her soul lived on, freed from its destined vessel. Godwin experienced the opposite. His soul was utterly destroyed while his body remained technically alive. Two demigods, one death split between them, each receiving half of what should have been whole. The discovery of Godwin's body sent shockwaves through the capital. Here lay the Golden Prince, unmarked save for the Cursemark, his eyes empty of the light that had inspired thousands. Yet his chest still rose and fell. His heart still beat. The flesh lived while everything that had made him Godwin was simply gone. Queen Marika's grief-stricken wail, they say, could be heard throughout Leyndell. Some claim this was the moment she first began to doubt the golden order she had built, seeing her beloved son reduced to breathing corpse. The immediate response was to attempt restoration. Healers, fundamentalists, and practitioners of every school of incantation were summoned. They tried to restore his soul, to reverse the Cursemark's effect, to at least grant him the mercy of true death. Nothing worked. The rune of death, even fragmented, had done something that couldn't be undone. Godwin existed in a state that defied classification, neither alive nor dead, but something horrifyingly between. The decision to enter him at the roots of the Erd Tree came from Marika herself. If her son couldn't be saved, perhaps he could at least be laid to rest in the most sacred place in all the lands between. Deep beneath the capital, where the Erd Tree's roots reached into the earth's foundation, they created a tomb worthy of the Golden Prince. Wrapped in golden cloth, surrounded by flowers that would never wilt in the Erd Tree's light, Godwin was laid upon roots that touched the very source of the Golden Order's power. What happened next, no one could have predicted. The roots that cradled Godwin's body began to change. Black veins spread through golden bark. The flowers wilted, then bloomed again in colors that shouldn't exist. The body itself started to transform. This wasn't decay. Decay implies a return to natural elements, a cycle completing itself. This was metamorphosis into something entirely other. The first changes appeared in his extremities. Fingers elongated, webbing growing between them like pale silk. His legs fused together, scales emerging from flesh that had once been praised for its perfection. The transformation spread inward, bones restructuring themselves according to no earthly anatomy. Those who witnessed these early stages and lived to record them describe being filled with a primordial dread, as if observing something that violated the fundamental rules of existence. As weeks passed, the transformation accelerated. Godwin's body grew, expanding beyond human proportions. His lower body became a massive tail, reminiscent of some deep-sea leviathan that had never known sunlight. Fins emerged from his arms and sides, delicate and translucent, yet somehow suggesting immense strength. His face, that noble visage that had once inspired loyalty and love, became something indescribable. Not a skull, not flesh, but something fungal and alien. Multiple eye sockets opened where none should be, weeping a substance that killed any living thing it touched. The corrupted prince didn't remain contained to his tomb. His essence, the death that lived within him, began spreading through the Erd Tree's root system. Wherever these tainted roots emerged, Deathroot sprouted, a plant that shouldn't exist, growing from the contradiction of Godwin's state. These roots spread far beyond the capital, emerging in catacombs throughout the lands between, each one carrying a fragment of the Prince of Death's influence. Fortissax, the dragon who had once called Godwin friend, sensed the corruption of her companion and took action that speaks to the depth of their bond. Dragons, beings of stone and lightning, typically view the affairs of lesser creatures with detachment at best. Yet Fortissax dove into what scholars call the Deathbed dream, a realm within Godwin's transformed consciousness where some echo of the prince might still exist. She fought to halt the corruption from within, battling the very concept of living death with ancient lightning. The battle within the dream lasted years, perhaps decades. Time moved strangely in spaces between life and death. Fortissax poured her entire being into the fight, her golden lightning clashing against waves of death that emerged from Godwin's corrupted essence. But how do you save someone whose soul no longer exists? How do you restore what has been completely erased? The dragon's loyalty proved her undoing. The death blight that permeated Godwin's being slowly infected her as well, corrupting her golden scales to black, transforming her into the Lick Dragon, forever trapped within the nightmare she had entered to save her friend. The spread of Deathroot created a phenomenon the Golden Order had never anticipated: those who live in death. When destined death was sealed away, the natural cycle of life and death was broken. Bodies that should have returned to the earth persisted. Souls that should have passed on remained tethered, but these were still recognizably part of the Golden Order system, returning to the Erdtree eventually. Those who live in death were different. They were beings animated by the contradiction of Godwin's existence, neither truly alive nor properly dead. These creatures began appearing wherever Deathroot took hold. Skeletons that reassembled themselves when shattered. Corpses that moved with purpose but no true consciousness. They weren't undead in the traditional sense. Undeath implies a perversion of life. These beings existed in the space between states, animated by the same paradox that sustained Godwin. They gathered near Deathroot, drawn to it like moths to flame, perhaps seeking in its corruption the true death denied them by the Golden Order. The Golden Order's response was swift and merciless. Those who live in death were declared abominations, their very existence blasphemous. Golden Order fundamentalists, led by hunters blessed with sacred weapons, began systematic purges. They burned Deathroot wherever it sprouted, shattered the walking dead with golden incantations, and sealed catacombs where the corruption had taken root. Yet for every root they burned, 2 more seemed to sprout elsewhere. Godwin's influence spread like a disease through the very network the Erdtree used to maintain its dominion. Some among the Golden Order began to whisper dangerous questions. If the Erdtree itself could be corrupted, if its roots could carry death instead of life, what did that say about the perfect order Marika had established? These doubts were quickly silenced, but they persisted in private conversations and hidden texts. The Prince of Death had become more than just a tragedy. He was proof that the Golden Order's promise of eternal perfection was, at its core, a lie. The environmental impact of Godwin's transformation extended beyond just Deathroot. Water sources near corrupted roots became tainted, spreading death blight to any who drank from them. The very air in certain catacombs became toxic, carrying microscopic spores that could take root in living flesh. Animals fled these areas instinctively, their natural senses detecting wrongness that went beyond simple danger. Even plant life unconnected to Deathroot began showing mutations, flowers that bloomed in impossible colors, trees that grew in spiral patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Yet not everyone viewed the Prince of Death as purely corruption. Among the downtrodden, the rejected, those who had never benefited from the Golden Order's light, a different perspective emerged. Here was a force that existed outside the established hierarchy, neither blessed by the Erdtree nor cursed by the traditional enemies of the Golden Order. Those who live in death, while hunted by fundamentalists, harmed no one unless provoked. They simply existed, seeking purpose in their paradoxical state. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating figure in Godwin's post-death narrative, Fia, the Deathbed companion. Her arrival in the lands between coincided with the spread of those who live in death, though whether she was drawn by their presence or helped facilitate it remains unclear. Fia belonged to an ancient tradition from beyond the lands between, women who lay with champions on the verge of death, drawing their warmth and vigor to grant them to those who had passed on. It was intimate magic, reviled by the Golden Order as perversion of the natural order. Fia saw in Godwin not an abomination, but a possibility. Here was a being of divine blood whose body lived while his soul had died, the perfect vessel for a new kind of existence. She believed that through the ritual of the Deathbed Companion, she could grant Godwin a second life, not as the Golden Prince he had been, but as something new, a true Prince of Death, who could offer an alternative to the Erdtree's monopoly on the afterlife. Her quest to achieve this goal required gathering the two halves of the Cursemark of Death, the mark carved into Godwin and its twin that had killed Ranni's body. The first half she could access through Godwin himself, entering his corrupted dream realm despite the danger of death, blight infection. The second required tracking down Ranni's original body, hidden away in the divine tower where her conspiracy had reached its climax. The fact that Fia succeeded in obtaining both marks speaks to either incredible determination or aid from powers that wanted to see the Prince of Death fully realized. The union between Fia and Godwin occurred not in the physical realm, but in that strange space between life and death, where the prince's consciousness, such as it was, resided. Fia lay with the corrupted demigod in the manner of her order, but this was no simple comfort given to the dying. She poured her own life force into him, attempting to kindle something new from the ashes of his destroyed soul. The process would kill her. Deathbed companions always paid a price for their magic, but never one this steep. Yet she considered it worthy sacrifice. From this union came something unprecedented, the mending rune of the Death Prince. This wasn't restoration or healing, but creation of something entirely new. The rune contained the power to mend the Elden Ring itself, but not to restore it to its previous state. Instead, it would establish a new order, where those who live in death would no longer be persecuted, where the monopoly of the Erdtree over life and death would be broken. The age of the Duskborn, as this potential future was called, represented a fundamental shift in how death functioned in the lands between. The implications of what Fia achieved cannot be understated. She had taken Godwin's corrupted existence and transformed it into a foundation for an entirely new world order. The Prince of Death would become not just an aberration, but a deity in his own right, offering an alternative to both the Erdtree's golden eternity and the complete oblivion of destined death. It was salvation for those deemed abominations, purpose for those who existed without true life or death. Yet even as Fia worked toward this goal, the Prince of Death's influence continued spreading through less intentional means. Death Knights, warriors who had once served Godwin in life, found themselves transformed by their proximity to Deathroot. Their flesh withered but didn't die, their armor fused to their bodies, and they gained a terrible vitality that allowed them to persist centuries beyond natural lifespan. They became eternal guardians of their fallen lord's legacy, protecting sites where his influence was strongest. These Death Knights retained more of their original consciousness than typical those who live in death. They could speak, plan, even engage in complex combat tactics. Yet they were utterly devoted to Godwin, not as he had been, but as he had become. They spoke of him in reverent whispers, calling him the Prince of Death, with the same loyalty they had once shown the Golden Prince. Some scholars suggest this indicates that something of Godwin's nature persists in his corrupted form, not his soul, which was destroyed, but an echo of his nobility transformed into something darker. The creatures drawn to serve the Prince of Death grew increasingly diverse as his influence spread. Deathbirds, ancient beings that predated the Erdtree, emerged from hiding to dance in places where death's power was strongest. These skeletal avians with wings of frozen flame had once been psychopomps, guides for souls passing to the afterlife. The Golden Order had driven them to near extinction, their role made obsolete by the Erdtree's consumption of souls. Now they returned, drawn to the Prince of Death as a kindred power that existed outside the Golden Order's design. Tibia mariners appeared in flooded catacombs and corrupted waterways, skeletal figures that pulled boats meant to ferry the dead across metaphysical waters. They summoned those who live in death from the waters themselves, as if the prince's influence had awakened long-drowned souls. The boats they guided existed partially in another realm, visible only as spectral impressions that became solid when approached. Where they were ferrying the souls they gathered, none could say. Even beings unconnected to death found themselves transformed by proximity to Godwin's influence. The basilisks, creatures whose false eyes could inflict death blight with their gaze, multiplied in areas where Deathroot was thickest. Whether they were created by the corruption or merely drawn to it remains debated. Their presence made exploring corrupted areas even more dangerous, as death blight could accumulate in the body until it reached a critical mass, causing instant death through cellular contradiction. The philosophical implications of the Prince of Death's existence challenged every assumption the Golden Order had built its authority upon. If death could be neither final nor properly contained by the Erd-Tree, what did that mean for the promise of eternal life under grace? If beings could exist in the space between life and death, what did that say about the binary nature of existence the Golden Order preached? These questions were dangerous, potentially destabilizing to the entire power structure of the lands between. Some scholars of the ancient world drew parallels between Godwin's transformation and myths that predated the Erd-Tree. The concept of Ningyo from distant lands, creatures that appear human but possessed aquatic features, whose flesh granted immortality but brought terrible curses, seemed to mirror Godwin's fish-like transformation. Was this convergent symbolism? Or did Godwin's metamorphosis follow patterns embedded in reality itself? The fungal aspects of Godwin's transformed face suggested connections to decomposition and recycling of matter. Yet his body didn't decay in any traditional sense. Instead, it grew and spread like a living organism, yet one that existed through death rather than life. Mycological scholars who studied samples of matter from near Deathroot, those who survived such dangerous research, describe cellular structures that shouldn't be able to function, yet somehow maintained coherent activity. The duality of Godwin's existence, Golden Prince and Death Deity, created a unique form of worship among certain populations. Secret cults emerged that venerated both aspects simultaneously, viewing his transformation not as fall but as apotheosis. They created icons that showed Godwin, half golden, half corrupted, representing the unity of life and death they believed he now embodied. The Golden Order hunted these cults relentlessly, but they persisted in hidden shrines and forgotten catacombs. The spread of Godwin's influence followed the underground root system that predated even the Erd-Tree, that ancient network that predated even the Erd-Tree. This suggested that his corruption wasn't limited to Marika's Golden Order, but threatened something even more fundamental. The ancient root system connected to sites of ancient power throughout the lands between, places where the world's foundation was thinnest. At each of these locations, Godwin's faces began to manifest, grotesque visages pushing through stone and earth, weeping the tears of the Prince of Death. The discovery of Godwin's face beneath Stormvale Castle proved particularly significant. This wasn't mere root spread, but targeted manifestation. Stormvale, ancient seat of the Stormlords who had ruled before the Golden Order, seemed to call to Godwin's corrupted essence. Some theorized that the Prince of Death was drawn to sites of former power, places where the current order had supplanted something older. Others suggested that Godwin's transformation was awakening things that should have remained buried. The manifestation at Stormvale displayed unique characteristics. The face there was more developed, more aware seeming than others. Guards reported hearing whispers in languages that predated common speech. The death blight that seeped from its tears formed patterns on the ground, not random spillage, but deliberate shapes that hurt to perceive directly. When Godric the Grafted took residence in Stormvale, he had the approaches to Godwin's face sealed, though whether from fear or respect remains unknown. Each location where Godwin manifested became a nexus for those who live in death. They gathered in increasing numbers, not as armies, but as congregations. They engaged in behaviors that suggested worship or communion, standing motionless for days facing the corrupted visages, moving in synchronized patterns that resembled religious ceremonies, creating arrangements of bones and Deathroot that might have been offerings or messages. The Golden Order's attempts to purge these sites met with increasing resistance, not just from those who live in death, who fought with surprising coordination when their gathering places were threatened, but from the very environment. Deathroot grew back faster than it could be burned. Sealed catacombs broke open from within. Waters that had been purified became corrupted again within days. It became clear that conventional methods couldn't contain the Prince of Death's influence. This realization led to desperate measures. Some fundamentalists proposed using the power of the Elden Ring itself to burn out the corruption at its source. Others suggested that Godwin's body should be destroyed entirely, reduced to ash that couldn't support his continued existence. These proposals were rejected by Marika herself, though whether from maternal love for her son's remains or fear of what might be released if the Prince of Death were truly destroyed, none could say. The relationship between the Prince of Death and other outer powers became a subject of fearful speculation. The formless mother, who dealt in wounds and blood, seemed to avoid places where Godwin's influence was strongest. The dark moon of Ranni's order cast different light on Deathroot, making it appear almost beautiful in its corruption. The frenzied flame, which sought to burn all distinction to ash, recoiled from those who live in death, as if they represented something antithetical to its nature. These interactions suggested that the Prince of Death had become something more than just corrupted demigod. He had evolved into a force of nature, a fundamental power that existed alongside but separate from the established cosmic order. Whether this transformation was intentional, some grand design of Ranni's or an older power's manipulation, or simply the universe's response to the paradox of his existence remained unknown. The discovery of the death ritual pots and their contents provided disturbing insight into how some viewed the Prince of Death. These vessels contained a mixture of Deathroot extract and human remains, created by those who sought to join willingly with Godwin's power. When thrown, they created temporary zones where the boundary between life and death became permeable. Warriors who used them reported experiencing brief moments of existing in both states simultaneously, painful but granting insights into the nature of mortality itself. As the shattering progressed and the various demigods warred for supremacy, the Prince of Death's influence grew quietly but steadily. While Radahn and Millennia clashed in Caelid, while Ricard fed himself to the god-devouring serpent, while Morgott defended Leyndell against all comers, Godwin spread through the roots, neither participating in nor abstaining from the conflict. He had become environmental, as much a part of the lands between as mountains or rivers. The role that Godwin's death played in triggering the shattering itself cannot be ignored. Marika's grief over her son's murder may have been the catalyst for her decision to shatter the Elden Ring. The fact that the Golden Order she had built couldn't protect or restore her beloved child might have proven to her that the system was fundamentally flawed. In this interpretation, the Prince of Death didn't just result from the shattering, but helped cause it. His paradoxical existence revealing contradictions that couldn't be reconciled. Yet for all the corruption and horror associated with the Prince of Death, there remained something tragically noble about Godwin's fate. He had been, by all accounts, genuinely good, a warrior who chose friendship over conquest, a leader who inspired through example rather than fear. That such a figure should become the source of such widespread corruption felt like cosmic injustice. Perhaps that's why beings like Fia saw in him not just horror, but potential for something better. The Mending rune of the Death Prince that Fia created offered a future where Godwin's transformation served a purpose beyond mere corruption. In the age of the Duskborn, those who live in death would no longer be abominations, but citizens of a new order. The Prince of Death would stand as patron of all who existed between states, offering them purpose and protection. It would be an age of twilight rather than golden noon, but perhaps more honest in its acceptance of death as part of existence. This potential future stood in stark contrast to other possible endings of the shattering, where the Age of Stars offered cold distance and the frenzied flame offered burning unity. The Age of the Duskborn offered acceptance of contradiction. Life and death need not be absolute states, but points on a spectrum. The Prince of Death, in his grotesque glory, would serve as proof that existence could persist even in impossible forms. The irony that Godwin, who in life had brought different powers together in harmony, would in death become a force of division and corruption was not lost on scholars. Yet perhaps this too was a form of unity, bringing together all those rejected by the Golden Order under his corrupted banner. The Death Knights who served him, those who live in death who gathered at his manifestations, the ancient powers like deathbirds that emerged from hiding, all found common cause in the Prince of Death. Modern interpretations of Godwin's transformation often focus on its body horror elements, the grotesque fusion of human and aquatic features, the fungal masses that suggest decomposition without decay. But this emphasis on the visual horror perhaps misses the deeper existential dread his existence represents. He is proof that identity, soul, the very essence of self can be completely destroyed while the flesh persists. Every shambling skeleton animated by his influence is a reminder that the body is just meat without the animating spirit, yet that meat can still move, still act, still corrupt. The search for meaning in Godwin's transformation has produced countless theories. Some see it as punishment for his friendship with dragons, corruption spreading from associations with powers outside the Golden Order. Others view it as the universe's attempt to fill the vacuum left by his destroyed soul, nature abhorring the emptiness and filling it with something alien. Still others suggest that the transformation was always Godwin's destiny, that he was meant to become the Prince of Death to serve some cosmic purpose not yet understood. What remains consistent across all interpretations is the sense of tragedy. Godwin didn't choose his fate. He was murdered in his sleep, used as a tool in someone else's rebellion, then transformed into something antithetical to everything he had been. Yet from this unwilling sacrifice emerged a power that challenged the fundamental order of the world. The Prince of Death stands as testament to the fact that even gods and demigods cannot fully control the forces they unleash. The long-term implications of Godwin's continued existence remain uncertain. Will his influence continue spreading until all the lands between are corrupted? Will he eventually develop some new form of consciousness, neither his original soul nor truly mindless? Or will he remain forever as he is, a wound in reality that cannot heal, cannot die, cannot be ignored? These questions hang over the lands between like the branches of the Erd tree itself, casting shadows that grow longer with each passing age. For those who delve into the deepest mysteries of Elden Ring's lore, Godwin represents one of the most complex and fascinating figures in the entire narrative. He is simultaneously victim and threat, noble prince and corrupted horror, dead yet undying. His transformation from Golden Champion to Prince of Death encompasses themes of identity, mortality, corruption, and the price of defying natural order that resonate throughout From Software's work. The discovery of new information about Godwin continues as dedicated investigators explore every corner of the lands between. Hidden item descriptions, environmental storytelling, and careful analysis of visual design reveal new facets of his tragedy. Each revelation adds depth to our understanding while raising new questions. Was there ever a moment when Godwin's fate could have been prevented? Could his transformation have been guided towards something less corrupted? These possibilities haunt the imagination, like the Prince of Death himself haunts the roots of the world. Standing before one of Godwin's corrupted faces, watching the endless tears of death blight seep from too many eyes, feeling the wrongness that radiates from his transformed flesh, one cannot help but wonder what thoughts, if any, persist in that destroyed mind. Does some fragment of the Golden Prince remain, trapped in endless nightmare? Or is there truly nothing left but the biological processes of a body that doesn't know it should be dead? The game offers no definitive answers, leaving us to contemplate the horror of existence without self. This ambiguity, this refusal to provide clear resolution, makes Godwin's story all the more powerful. In a world where gods walk among mortals, where the laws of nature bend to the will of those with sufficient power, The Prince of Death represents the ultimate uncertainty. He is the question mark at the heart of the Golden Order's promise of eternal life. What good is a body that lives forever if the soul, the self, the essential being can be destroyed? What meaning does immortality have if it can be corrupted into something worse than death? As we reach the conclusion of this journey through Godwin's transformation, we must acknowledge that his story is far from over. The Prince of Death continues to spread his influence, continues to challenge the established order, continues to offer an alternative to those who seek it. Whether that alternative represents salvation or damnation depends entirely on one's perspective. For those who live in death, he is liberation from persecution. For the Golden Order, he is existential threat. For the player, he is a mystery that may never be fully solved. The tragedy of Godwyn the Golden becoming the Prince of Death resonates because it speaks to fundamental fears about identity, mortality, and corruption that transcend the game itself. In Godwin, we see the possibility that everything we are could be destroyed while our body persists. That our legacy could become the opposite of everything we stood for. That our very existence could become poison to the world we sought to protect. These are not comfortable thoughts, but they are powerful ones, and it's this willingness to explore such dark territory that makes Elden Ring's lore so compelling. Thank you for joining me on this deep exploration into one of Elden Ring's most haunting transformations. The story of Godwin reminds us that in the lands between, as in the greatest mythologies, the most profound truths often emerge from the darkest tragedies. If this investigation into the Prince of Death has enriched your understanding of Elden Ring's incredible narrative complexity, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these hidden stories, to dig deeper into the lore that makes these worlds so unforgettable. Share your own theories and discoveries in the comments below. The beauty of Elden Ring's storytelling is that there's always another layer to uncover, another connection to make, another mystery waiting in the shadows. Until next time, remember that in the lands between, death is never quite the end, and sometimes that's the most terrifying truth of all. This has been Keen 7 Lore, and I'll see you in the next deep dive into gaming's greatest mysteries.